Hello, this is Darren Pulsipher, Chief Solution Architect of Public Sector at Intel, and welcome to Embracing Digital Transformation, where we investigate effective change leveraging people, process, and technology. On today's episode, a GenAI advisor for data center management with special guest Greg Campbell, CTO of vergeio. Greg, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Darren.
Hey, this is your second time on?
Yes. You brought me back.
It's been like a year and a half almost.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, so exciting. So I don't want you to just pitch your idea. You talked to me the other day and I went, oh, that is cool. That is super cool. What you guys are doing with your virtualized infrastructure. But real quick, give people a little bit of your background and why you started vergeio, and then we'll get into this new technology on leveraging GenAI in infrastructure management. I think it's pretty slick.
Sure. Yeah. So software developer and entrepreneur my whole life. Started the Commodore 64 days, and just never stopped coding. Never ran companies, but even as running the company, I'm always in the code. So always deep in the weeds.
Dear to my heart, Greg. Dear to my heart.
Yes, and so I had a couple small exits, and was actually starting another company building search engines and some pretty what I thought was complicated stuff at the time. And this was like 07, 08 time frame, and I had realized that trying to stitch together lots of resources, lots of servers to build the search engine, I needed billions of results and millions of queries or millions of results, and there's no single server that can do that, right? And I kind of saw that there was something missing, and I in the end got it coded, made it work, but I found that a good 80% of my time had nothing to do with the search engine. It was stitching together infrastructure, taking these servers, making them play nice together, distributing storage and communications and security and compute. And I realized there was something missing in my toolbox to make that happen right away. And kind of in my thought at the time was kind of like what the personal operating system, what the hardware abstraction layer did to a server by allowing developers to not have to worry about hardware and code generically. We needed something like that for lots of servers.
For distributed servers, got it.
Yes. And so started a company. At the time, I called it Yottabyte. And the idea was to stitch together these things. I knew storage was going to be the more difficult problem to solve. So started with storage, with Yottabyte, and trying to stitch together and present storage in a very common way, whether it's a single laptop that I'm coding off of or 1,000 servers, make it work no matter what, right? No matter what the hardware is, with the eventual idea of then building in compute and networking to ultimately get to the concept of virtual data center, which is what we did, and now it is presented out there under vergeio in our Verge operating system.
So it's really cool technology. There's an episode on that. If you guys go back and look on our podcast, you can hear the whole story of vergeio, and we even did a demonstration on the podcast of connecting two clusters. But the new stuff that you were taught, that you've been playing around with, because you are like me, you are a tinkerer.
Oh yeah.
Right. And you probably think of, I can't wait to relax and code something up.
Yes.
But that's your escape, right?
When I finally retire and then I could just code more stuff. Yeah.
I feel the same way. My wife, I've mentioned this on the show before, I think. My wife loves to read books when we go on vacation on a beach or by the pool. I have my laptop, and what am I doing? Genetic algorithms, or now it's going to be generative AI. So you cracked open Llama 2, right?
Yeah, I've always, my hobby outside of work and coding and everything I do normally has always been AI, and so I've always had an ear and an eye on AI. I've written my own neural networks. Years ago, I built a whole video compression system that was basically a neural network, and instead of the standard compression algorithms it was using. Like it was like predicting, pixel sequences and
Oh,
learning
that's cool.
patterns. And basically, it was a neural network, and it was really freaky too. When I finally got it working, it was like watching, like I would imagine watching somebody's dream. That's what it was like.
That's what it's like. Oh, that's pretty
Yeah.
cool.
But so I've always been tinkering and kind of watching, and honestly, my retirement would have been working on AGI and AI, something where I don't necessarily have to worry about making a profit immediately because it's high risk, very long term kind of stuff. But yeah, I mean, obviously, anybody with any interest in AI at all is all hands on deck watching what's unfolding in the world right now. The past just really year and a half, 2 years, right?
Yeah, not even that. Almost
Right.
not even a year.
Yeah, exactly. So, so obviously, yeah, I've been playing around and yeah, with the new Llama 2 announcement a few weeks ago, I mean, that really opened up a lot for the tinkerers now to be able to play around with this stuff. So, yeah, I've been playing and got some cool results so far and some really good ideas to kind of extend, our vision of automating infrastructure, automating the data center, and just bringing it down to a level that we don't need all the complexity and experts and everything that goes along with it.
So one thing we've been talking on the podcast recently about is use cases of generative AI, and you found a really interesting use case specifically around infrastructure management, which I think is actually pretty brilliant. And to me, it's an example of a huge shift in user interface design and in adaptive user interfaces, which to me is really exciting because it simplifies things so much.
Right.
So I just pitched you a big, fat, juicy pitch right down the middle. So take us home with this.
Yeah. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the plan, because my role in the company, I'm the founder and CTO. So, yes, I have the day job of coding the product, but I'm also the guy that gets to look to the future and play, do the research and development and tinker and build the prototypes. So I get the fun stuff too, right?
Right?
And
Yeah.
so, yeah, I'm kind of there's like 4 or 5 kind of things that I see kind of emerging out of this. And first and foremost, it just, which is the heart and soul of our product is simplicity, right? Like, so much of what we have in infrastructure, there's a lot of complexity that just arose from how we got here. We have all these different components, storage, networking, and compute, and backup, and security and user management, all these things, and then they all have to talk to each other. And there's multiple vendors and multiple licenses and multiple versioning, and it just all gets really complicated. So then you have to have a lot of very educated and trained and skilled staff that know all of these individual silos and somebody to pull it all together and coordinate everything. And it's very expensive, and there's just not enough people out there that even understand this stuff, right? So, which is why the cloud is taken over so much, because it's like, I'll just outsource it.
Well, yeah, that wasn't that the promise of the cloud? The promise of the
Right.
cloud was to simplify things, right?
Absolutely. But the trade-off is, instead of, buying a house, you're renting one, right? Or living out of a hotel, basically.
To me, the complexity shifted and actually increased.
Yeah, in many ways it has. Yes, absolutely. So the thought was, okay, we've got these cool models now that have basically been trained on almost all of human knowledge, in particular whatever's on the internet. And
Right.
it goes without saying that pretty much anything computer related is on the internet. That's the one knowledge set that we're pretty much covered.
Yeah.
As far as what's going to be scraped, right? So it's very easy to start to get something together that already has a pretty good IT generalist starting point, And so the thought was, okay, there's a few ways to go about this, we're playing with, but we take something like that, train it as well on our product specifically, IT, infrastructure management, hardware, all the stuff that we've learned over the past decade plus in doing what we're doing. And what if that was available to you at all times? That not only from a answer my generic questions, as I ask it, about the product and about just IT in general. But it also has the context of your environment. It's not just a generic thing. It's something that's been trained generically, but also has this extra context of what does my environment look like right now? What's the makeup? How many servers do I have? What vendors am I using?
What applications am I running?
What applications am I running? What are the current, CPU, and memory stats, of every single server? And you have all that context in, with whatever you're querying it. So I could ask it very generic things like, why are things running slow right now? And it knows I'm talking about my infrastructure, knows who I am, it knows all the stats and information, and it has all the history of what are all the things that can make things be slow. And it can come back and say, well, for starters, maybe we should take a look at node number 5, which seems to be running at, all cores at 100% CPU and blah, 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 blah. Which, is very cool, especially at the ready all the time, no matter where you are. I mean, yeah, we got support and support staff and everything, but, having access to that level 3 support right there, and with all the knowledge of all your current stuff, even our support staff is going to have to, okay, let's look things up, let's see what things look like right now in your environment, and refresh my memory. So there's some really cool stuff that can happen, especially as we train in on all the data that we have about some
so let's talk a little bit about the training. So this is very different than what you see with like ChatGPT or Bard or Cloud, which is you took a generalized model. Llama 2 has a lot of general knowledge.
Yep, for starting.
Then
point.
you almost clipped its wings a little bit and said, I don't want you to know all the general knowledge. I want you to focus on IT management knowledge.
Right. Kind of, somewhat, trying to constrain it and,
constrain it a little bit.
We're talking about this. Yeah. And so like part of what we've been experimenting with is kind of finding the right balance between, training the system, and versus context. There's kind of this trade-off.
How much I gotcha.
Pre-trained and built in from a very generic perspective versus take your generic model and now let's allow you to role play, because these things are really good at role playing. But let's set your persona and get you locked in your zone, and you are a consultant working with however you want to frame it, but you can kind of just through context even allow it to hone in and learn a lot. So we've been playing around with the good, trying to find that balance there.
And then you also give it live feeds of real time data as well.
Absolutely, yeah. And we've been playing around with like even there's a little bit of like a multiple aspects. There might be some reiterative stuff where one model is asking another model to take this data set and reduce it into something that might be actionable, and then the other one's trained more on operating off of that. So there's even some.
So I really like this approach, because a lot of people, when they think of large language models, it's one model to rule them all.
Right.
And what I've found, and you're kind of reiterating it, is it's the combination of models that have been trained to do different things that get you the result that you want.
Yeah, it's you absolutely. I mean, obviously the generic ones are powerful, and if we had enough hardware and everything, you could run a massive model that knows everything. But it also sometimes other knowledge can get in the way and can confuse it, and
Yeah, and that comes up with the concept of hallucinations, right?
Yes.
Right.
And honestly, that's the biggest problem we're running into right now is how big and how advanced this need to be to get the right data sets. Because as soon as you try to over optimize or shrink it down too much, then it's just it starts to make stuff.
Or if you tell it to give you more creativity,
right.
It's going to get very creative. Which when you're managing infrastructure, you don't want creativity.
No, this is we're all about the fact we're a bunch of geeks, right? We're very, very specific. We're going to be very technical.
So, all right. So this is pretty cool. So let's talk about some of the scenarios that you think this could really help out with.
Yeah.
Because you mentioned complex, you're going to simplify things quite a bit. So what does that mean to my staff? What does that mean to if well,
Yeah.
you
So
know where I'm going with this.
yeah. So there's a few cases, and I think so we see it a lot with even with our customer base that it's hard to get good people that are technical enough at this low level, right? And even if you have a couple people, they're not always available. They're busy. They're overwhelmed. They're expensive. So I mean, we get a lot of just even with our support. More often than not, it ends up being nothing to do with our product. We're helping them diagnose hardware issues and guest level things and infrastructure and IT in general. It's tough, right? There's so many pieces
There's so
to the
many
puzzle.
variables.
Exactly. And so a big piece is to have that available to everybody, almost built into the product, that you've got this consultant available at all times that you can ask and query. But then once you start doing some other things with it, it's the first step is you have to initiate, right? You're asking it a question. It's just there to help. It's just there to consult. But you could start to go a step further from there, a couple of steps further. So one thing we're looking at is things like, okay, well, what if I'm not initiating it? What if the system is sending, periodic snapshots and, here's my current state. Hey, do you see anything wrong? No? Great. Do you see anything wrong? And it's just continually asking it. See anything wrong now?
Yeah. So let's say that it's asking every I don't know, minute or every
Right.
hour, whatever.
Pick the interval.
It finds something and it sends me an email or pages me, whatever the case may be. In the old systems, we used to page people.
Yes.
For you Gen Z and millennials, you don't know what a pager is.
Right.
Old sysadmins, we walked around with a pager all the time.
Right. And ignored the 911.
Yeah, exactly. So, but I'm notified if something goes wrong. The way that you envision it, can my digital virtual sysadmin, can they learn from the interaction with me as well? Meaning those things aren't that big of a deal.
Right. Well, and the first phase of it is going to be to learn from us and from our all the data that we have, and to learn what types of alerts,
what things are alerts and what aren't.
Yeah, and even beyond that, next step is okay, one of the AI models determines that there's an issue, and then it sends that result to a different AI model with the question of, you just received this alert. What would your next action be? Right.
Oh, interesting.
And so then, and maybe at that level, that's the email. Hey, we saw this and here's what we suggest. Well, then you go a step further from there. And now let's say, we train a model on how to speak API, because that's just a language, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so maybe I didn't go so far as to say, okay, if you're this confident or X confident, it's here's the action I've determined I should take. I'm going to email everybody and just let everyone know. And 10 minutes, I'm executing this action unless you tell me not to.
Unless you tell me not to. All right. You now created a semi-sentient bot, not sentient, but really now you've got a collaboration of AI models that are actually doing stuff, that are not just notifying Darren or Greg. You're actually, I'm going to reboot that machine. I'm going to take that machine down.
Right. And once they have that AI access, I mean, that's a much further down the line where you actually allow it to take action. But even before that, I fully see user interfaces shifting and changing, right? And, we have these complicated user interfaces because for the most part, our computers
they're written by us. That's why they're complicated.
Yeah, one thing is written by developers, and the other is they don't speak English.
No, that's exactly right. Right.
And other than maybe having some pretty dashboards and visualization tools to help give me information, the whole point and click and do what I got to do. Maybe a chat interface is better. in some cases. Maybe it's just quicker and easier to, for my phone, just, hey, can you reboot server 4 for me?
Or, hey, can you apply this patch to all the machines that need it and reboot them at 2:00 this morning?
And if it doesn't work, just roll it back.
Yeah, if it doesn't work, roll back and make sure nothing is running on those machines when you do it.
Right, exactly.
Do you know how long that would take to code up? And I just mentioned it in 3 sentences.
Right, and that's the thing, and that's really what a lot of these language models are doing for us, is that it's taking a lot of the stuff that would have taken programming, and we've shifted what programming looks like. Even a lot of the stuff I'm doing now, even playing with this, it's like, yeah, there's some code involved, but a lot of it it's English. Like, English is the programming language to manipulate it into what
wasn't that always when I went to college and got my CS degree? That was the thing. Higher level languages. We always talked about it.
Yeah.
You guys, and they always taught us assembly first and machine language first, right? So we would appreciate the higher level languages like C and C++, and then Fortran and Pascal and Lisp and those things. Now, I truly believe we could start seeing some new languages based on chat.
Yeah, for sure. Or at the very least, I could see, a degree as an English major becoming a lot more valuable.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Or even shifting, how, just in learning the proper way of wording things and getting proper context and everything that goes along with, how you interact with these models. It's
so my big question, kind of an ethical question, is, do you see these types of combination of models and AIs replacing the number of people I need to manage a data center? Because what's the ratio today? Is it like 300 servers per? I used to know these numbers, and I don't anymore.
Yeah, and it changes all the time.
It changes all the time, but
I see right now that it's such a struggle. Unless you're one of the big guys, it's really hard to get. I don't think I've ever talked to a customer running a data center or running, whatever their business is, that said, I got too much talent. I've never heard anybody say that. Right. So, and I don't see it necessarily replacing the head count. I see it supplementing and filling in the gaps that you couldn't afford, or at least you couldn't have even attained, this level.
Well, yeah, because there's so much
and
to
still
know.
be profitable. Right.
Yeah. You're a generalist like I am, right? Because systems, operating systems, programming, both front end and back end. There aren't a lot of guys like us out there.
Right.
Right. And our knowledge is very broad. If you gave me a coding test on the best way to use different data structures and like pointer arithmetic type stuff in C and C++, I would fail.
Right.
Right. Because I don't code that way anymore.
Yeah. Right.
Right. But I know what to look up.
Well, yeah. And that's, it's hard to even reproduce us.
Yeah.
Because, and I'm talking about in terms of like future generations, because IT, this field of any field that you can learn of, in college, like this field has changed so much over the years that the foundation of my journey to get here and what I worked with and the RAM limits and how we had to code is just so different than what people are starting from now.
It's a different set of skills. So do we clone ourselves into these AIs? I mean that a little bit tongue in cheek, but not really.
We're already joking about it around the office now, that we've we always joked about, how do we find the Greg or the Paul or the whatever clone button to get more of us, and now we might have a bunch of virtual Gregs that sales engineers
that understand the complexity of all the complexity.
Right. And how different would it really be? I mean, as it is now, I mean, our company, we're now completely remote, other than, some daily video conferences and stuff like that. Most of our day-to-day interactions are all through chat. It's, somebody, hey, Greg, real quick, I got a customer now. What do you think of this? Or how would you answer this? I mean, would they know If
No.
I had a
Oh,
properly trained
so how do
model,
I know I'm really talking to Greg right now?
right? Yeah. Well, hey, I mean, if this is pre-recorded, or, I actually get enough hardware, maybe it even could do it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You
But
never know. I just recently did something really crazy. I used 11 Labs, who does voice synthesis,
oh,
a part of the AI, right?
yeah.
I cloned my voice, and now I produce my weekly podcast, the news podcast that I do weekly. Check it out as I'm embracing
Oh,
digital this week. I
that's
now
awesome.
produce it in 6 different languages with me speaking the languages.
With your that's awesome. That is so cool.
And luckily, I do speak Portuguese, so I did Portuguese first,
Oh, so you could compare, do a
so I
little
could
test
compare
run.
it to my Portuguese. I've never spoken such great Portuguese in my whole life than what's computer generated.
Oh, that's
Um,
incredible.
and it's pretty impressive. I was like, wow. So that just goes. That's just heading in that direction. But
Mhm.
I think the benefit of these types of generative AIs, especially in complex systems, is the human brain cannot contain all that information and recall it
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
like a generative AI can,
yeah,
right?
right. I mean, there were some tests that I did, where I'm kind of comparing it to how I might answer an email or respond to a support, and yeah, there was stuff that I didn't train on, but because it also started with this general knowledge, it was able to add color and to the response that I probably, I mean, yeah, I know what it's talking about, so I know it's right, but like I either wouldn't have thought to add that much color to it, or it even throws in a couple things like, oh yeah, they're right. I didn't even think of that. Where like I was doing some stuff where I threw out a bunch of sample data and said, hey, do you see anything wrong? But I had already trained it on some of our stats of like, these numbers shouldn't be
Right,
this
right,
high, or
right.
look at these thresholds. And one particular, we were talking about like swap in virtual memory and not to exceed certain amounts. But rather than just giving the answer, I gave it, hey, yeah, I identified one of your servers over here is running in swap, and that we should take a look at it. It went into a whole thing about what swap is and why this is a problem and how it's going to
Wow. So
thrash
that
the drives, or your memory is running fast, and it's like, wow, hey, I didn't tell it to do that, but
no,
it
but
had that general knowledge. It filled it in. It was correct, and
well, yeah. Well, so that's great. So, all right, here's the next big question, and we'll finish with this. You obviously don't completely trust it because you're checking it,
sure.
right? So, is there a level of trust, and how do we articulate that level of trust?
Yeah, I mean it's a tough one for sure. And that's why I think we absolutely have to inch our way into this. The turning it over to the full access is way down, and it might not even be possible, right? I mean,
So
you know,
for you, the trust is I got to train whoever's using the system. I have to train them enough to know whether the AI is giving something valuable back or not.
yes, and that's also why I still refer to it as like a consultant. Okay, it's still it's giving you some input, it's giving you some answers, but ultimately you still need to
You need to
determine
make a
whether
decision.
you're going to pull the trigger on it or not, right?
Yeah.
And at the same time, it's funny because the bar we have for these things is so incredibly high. I mean, same thing with self-driving, right? Like we need
Oh
full
yeah, yeah.
self-driving
Our
to be
self-driving is
100%. But you compare it to a bunch of humans, and it's like
well, well, yeah.
we're not 100%.
I think it's kind of funny too, right? We put in some states they put 14-year-olds behind a car,
Right? Yeah, right.
right? And they say, well, yeah, but I trained him, right? And I look at my son; he's getting his driver's license right now. He needs 40 hours of training, right? 40 hours of me
Right.
driving with him around town, and then he can go and try and pass his test. And and I'm thinking, wow, for AIs, our bar has been much higher. And I
Yeah.
think rightfully so. Um,
Yes. Yes.
right?
No, it's yeah, it's interesting because like I'm sure if I went through all my support teams' responses to customers and stuff, I mean, I'm sure I could find countless examples of where they misspoke or said something wrong or they weren't quite right on that. I'm not going to fire them for it. They're doing great. They're an excellent employee. But if something like this does that even once, it's like, oh no, this isn't going to work.
So how do we do that so that we can? Is that just over time? Where the augmented consultant is sitting next to a real consultant, and you're bouncing ideas off of it, and you go, "That's a good one. That one's not a good one." So you still need to stand up to your AI a little bit and teach it.
Yeah, certainly at the beginning and everything. But at the same time, I will say, what we're seeing now with these models, and as they're getting larger, we don't entirely know why or how, but they are, as we make these things bigger, they are absolutely getting smarter. And the same, and I see the difference as I compare like a 13 billion parameter versus a 7 versus a whatever, as you start to go up, those little mistakes that it made at the beginning, it's like, oh, this is never going to work, right?
Really?
And then you go up to a little bigger model, and all of a sudden it's like it aces it. It's like it not only did it get it correct, but it validated and explained the whole thing, and obviously understood the logic behind it. It's not regurgitating stuff that it already knew, and so it's there's promise there. It's hard to say it's not. It'll never get there. It sure seems like, I wouldn't bet against it at this point. I think it's going to be able to get to a level where, it is at least the equivalent of a decent, maybe not your top employee, but it's going to be. Employee.
Yeah. Well, and in the case of, let's say that I have a case, and we do have a case that we've been talking about, but let's say that I have a case where I have a whole bunch of remote sites, remote offices, and I have to manage all that stuff, and I have someone local on site. But their main job is not managing that infrastructure. Their main job is doing something else.
Yes. Perfect.
This would be perfect for that, right? Because I could have an AI sitting there, and the person could go, well, I don't know. I can't know all the intricacies of and maybe it's a grocery store, for example, right? And they've got a data center in the grocery store monitoring everything. And the person comes in and just says, what's wrong with the system? It's running really slow.
Right. And then imagine the system trained on even knowing the context of where you're at and what their level is, to where it could say things, to where now your remote staff is basically just the remote hands. And this thing could say, can you look behind and see if the green light is flashing or solid? It's solid. Great. Now can you look and do this? They don't have to even know what's going on. They just have to have general common sense, right?
Yeah. So this is wonderful, Greg. As always, it's a pleasure talking to you, and this has got me really excited. I can't wait to see what you guys are going to produce, and that it hopefully moves out of the lab and kind of as a partner. I want one to go through my emails.
Yeah,
that's all I'm going to say. I get too many emails a day, so this is exciting stuff.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks so much for having me on here. Yeah, I love talking about it, and we're having a lot of fun playing with it for sure.
Thank you for listening to Embracing Digital Transformation today. If you enjoyed our podcast, give it 5 stars on your favorite podcasting site or YouTube channel. You can find out more information about Embracing Digital Transformation at embracingdigital.org. Until next time, go out and do something wonderful.